Good morning. Good morning, everyone. It's going to be a really exciting morning. Please do come to the front so that as folks come in, they can sit at the back and we can create a little community. So I really encourage you, for those comfortably sitting at the back, to please make your way to the front of the room. And in the meantime, please scan the QR code. We want to hear from you. We're going to make this as participatory as possible. It is a conversation. So once again, welcome. Please do come to the front, scan the QR code, and we'll circle back to your thoughts. All righty. We'll wait a couple of minutes, but really excited to see folks streaming in. Please do feel free once again to scan the QR code. And if you're sitting at the back, don't be shy, come to the front, because I'm sure in the next 10 or so minutes, the room will be quite full. So it'd be easier for those coming in. All right, thank you. All righty, we're gonna start on time, and we know that folks will join us and meet us where we're at. Good morning, everyone. Once again, I think I've said it 3 times already, but I'm just trying to make sure we're all in the room. So I'm gonna say good morning, and I hope to hear from you. Good morning, everyone. I love that energy. Just a little bit more zhuzh or zestiness is the word we use. Good morning, everyone. I love that. Thank you for being here and joining this particular session. My name is Dr. Fatou Wuri. I am originally from Sierra Leone, and I have the distinct pleasure and honor to be moderating this session wherein you'll be in conversation with an excellent lineup of speakers and doers and leaders. So I really look forward to it. Thank you, as I've said before, for joining this session on diverse values and ethics in designing population policies. As we go through the morning, we encourage you. I know my face is here, but once again, if you just want to put up the QR code, you can have the QR code and you can fill out you can engage with whatever pops up on that QR code. But it really is a privilege to hold this conversation at a moment when population discourse is once again moving to the center of global policy debates, more urgently, more pressing than before. Population policies are often presented as technical, neutral, utilitarian, and inevitably responses to demographic trends. But we know that population policy is never neutral. It's never as technical as it is presented. So consider this. In one country, a woman, for example, may receive financial incentives to have a 3rd child, and yet in another, she may lose her government job for the same choice. Same act, different systems, different values deciding her fate. So we've come to know that population policy is shaped by values, the spoken and the unspoken ones, about whose lives are prioritized, whose labor is counted, whose autonomy is protected, and whose is negotiable. Behind every fertility target, every incentive, and every restriction sits a world view, a belief about gender, productivity, care, and control. So today's session really isn't about declaring population policy right or wrong or existing in the binaries. It is more about asking the honest and necessary and hard questions. What values are embedded in the policies we design? What are the intended and unintended consequences for health systems and for health equity? And how can population policies respond to demographic change without sacrificing the dignity and care so that we're truly carrying everyone with us? And so the speakers today will speak to that, and I know that your engagement and your thoughts will also further flourish this discussion. We'll explore these questions across 4 contexts: from Bhutan, India, a perspective from Asia, and as well as Africa, as a way to learn from one another versus really comparing experiences. So I invite all of you here today to stay within the complexity, to resist any easy binaries, and to hold one binding question as we listen and we speak to one another. When demographic goals and human dignity collide, who decides which yields and who pays the price? In short, who benefits now and who bears the costs later? Conversations around equity. Our session has three main objectives. The first one is to learn about the intended and unintended consequences of values and ethics on health equity, to better identify mechanisms to enable health systems to better respond to them, to ensure equitable population policies, and to equip participants, all of us, on how to frame values and ethics in designing population policies. And so I'll just briefly go through the agenda for today. I hope that our loud hellos have perhaps gotten us a little acquainted to one another. And this is really the intro round. So, I'll give you a moment very shortly to turn to the person on the right if you're sitting next to someone and just say hello. But we'll do that. And then we will go through the QR code, the feedback that's come through that. And then we will start with our first speaker. And then we'll have from Bhutan, and then our other speaker from India. And then we'll take a moment just to check in and see how we're doing. And then we'll have the regional overview from Asia, and then the regional overview from the continent. And there will be around 20 minutes of a panel discussion where we all come back in conversation, taking in these four presentations. And then we will wrap up, and then remind everyone to please scan another QR code that gives feedback. To be honest, I'm not the best feedback person, but I realize it's really, really important so that we strengthen these experiences now and for future conferences to come. So how does that sound? Great, good, clear. Okay, I like that. All right. So perhaps for those that have, lots of comments coming in, do we want to show the responses? So these questions are a way to better understand who's in the room. So where are we from? Are the responses coming in, or am I the one that's... Yeah, okay. Who is in the room today? Okay. All righty. Ooh. Welcome. I'm seeing one all the way in... Huh? Yeah. We've got a bit from the continent, lots from Asia. All righty. So just take a look to see who is in the room today. And so when you're saying your hellos, you're also getting a sense of where folks may be. All right, we've got at least 5. Maybe the next one? How would you characterize the population policy in your setting? Okay. Keep them coming. I love it. Of the 28 folks in here, 22 are responding. Oh, we're getting almost to full response. So many of us are not sure. And so if we're not sure, our voices or how are we contributing? This is really good. All right, we'll go to the next question. Thank you for sharing that. What is the main policy impact of this policy in your setting? What is the main policy impact of this policy? Okay. Ineffective. Whatever policy it is that you're aware of, uncertainties, ineffective, unsure, more birth, no impact. Stress, poverty, unsure. This is wonderful. All right, 1 more minute. Keep them coming in. Okay, a lot of uncertainties, no impact, political, ineffective, loss of efficiency, unsure. Thank you for that. All right, next question. Excuse me. Which value is most important for you when shaping this type of policy in your setting? Hmm. Keep them coming. I would love to hear feedback from those who are on individual autonomy. What does that mean? Oh, more folks are in the room. I'm loving it. We're filling up. All right, 30 more seconds. And the value that is most pronounced is equity and justice, as well as individual autonomy. All right. Is there another question? Or that's it? Can someone who just very quickly, this is just for purely my curiosity, for those that that voted for individual autonomy, can someone just speak to that really briefly? What that means? Would you like to? Okay. I like that. At the end of the day, how do these policies affect me at a very micro level? What does that mean for me and my family and my community? Thank you for that. As you've seen the responses come in, we see the diversity of experiences just in this room, based on where we're from, what's important to us, and how we engage or know of these policies. Pro-natalist context, anti-natalist context, mixed or uncertain environments. This uncertainty is really important. This not knowing, not being sure is important. It reminds us that population policy is often experienced not as clarity, but as pressure on our bodies, on our families, on our health, on workers, and on systems that are sometimes not designed to absorb these contradictions. So thank you, and please, a round of applause for yourselves this morning. Alrighty, enough of my voice. I'm really excited to introduce the speakers today that we will all be in conversation with. So as they come up one by one, please do give them a very warm welcome. We're joined today by 4 speakers, really bringing diverse and beautiful and excellent perspectives from policy, practice, and research. Please help me in welcoming Dechan Wangmo, the head of the PMA Secretariat in Bhutan. Please. We can be a little warmer for Dechan. Yes.
Good morning. I think in the plenary this morning, I talked about how small Bhutan is. Bhutan is known for its concept of gross national happiness. For many who doesn't know, Bhutan puts well-being at the center of its development. We are, I won't say interested, but we are more, when we look at the developmental philosophy, we remain guided by the core principle of gross national happiness, which basically translate to collective well-being and happiness of our people. And when we look at what is today, Bhutan, by the way, is a very small country, wedged between the two nations, 1.4 billion in the north and 1.4 billion in the south. We have a population of 0.79 million, very small. So for us, the issue that we are discussing at the PMAC at the moment, the demographic crisis or demographic transition or demographic impact is very visible. For a small country, it actually gets amplified to a larger extent. So if you look at these pyramids, this is happening just in my lifetime. We are not waiting half a century, or a century. It's happening in my lifetime. And I love these slides because as a legislator, as a policymaker, wearing that hat when we go and talk about demography and its stress on the social sector, particularly education and health, for Bhutanese, it's very difficult to understand that pyramid. So then I show them the other picture. And I tell them, look around. And then they realize that just in their lifetime, we are seeing less children. We're seeing more elderly people. You know, as I mentioned this morning, we had an attrition of in 2023, when I was in the government heading the Ministry of Health, 12,000 young Bhutanese left the country for better opportunities abroad. And for many, that 12,000 may be very small. If you're coming from if you're coming from India, Bangladesh, Nepal, in our part of the world. But for Bhutan, that accounts for 1.5% of our population. And when we go inside that attrition, we realize that most of this were health worker, skilled worker leaving the country. And then the biggest challenge we are faced with is then how do we sustain the health system? So I was so happy to see the equity and the social justice as one of the core values that you all believe in. And that forms the foundation of what Bhutan stands for. So when we look at, human capital, so we have the government system that actually looks at the whole range of population as a whole, right? But then within that population, we have many vulnerable population. And we begin to question, what are we doing for these vulnerable population? Or have we done enough for them, right? Next, please. Can I control it from here? I should be able to control. Yeah? Yeah. So this is, thank you. This is a quote by His Majesty the Fifth King in 2015. What we lack in number, we must make up in talent. You know, so for us, Bhutan doesn't have a standing national demographic policy or a population policy per se, but we remain guided by the vision of our kings. So this is a statement that His Majesty raised, said, what we lack in number, we must make up in talent. So when we do that, how do we make up for talent? Because we definitely lack in number. Our birth cohort is around 11,000. Very small. A population of less than 1 million. You know, and then we said, let's look at what we are doing. So at the government level, of course, when we are talking about building talent, we are looking at upskilling, skilling, literacy, improving education, improving vocational education. So a lot of investment happening at that point. And a few years back, after I left the government, I realized that I think there are other sector from the equity and the social justice lens that we need to look at the population. And it was during that time that we realized there's something called the forgotten human capital. The forgotten human capital in a nation of cross-national happiness. I looked at a prison system. We had a small prison-based program. I looked at there, I had, at one point when I was visiting there, one of the prisoners wanted to come and see me. And I said, okay, I'll see you. We met and I told him what the problem was. And it wasn't an issue about him being in the prison. He was more worried about his family. His 6-year-old outside with his wife who is unemployed. And I asked him, what are you doing? And he said, there's nothing I can do because I'm in prison. And then I asked him, would you like to do something? And he said, yes, if given the opportunity. And then we did a nationwide study of our prison population. And we realized we had a significant number. We had around 2,500 prisoners. By Bhutanese standard, again, that's a big number, right? So then we said, okay, let's work with that. Let's design a program for them so that they are empowered to make that decision, so that they are empowered to take that individual autonomy to do what they want to do. So that was the vision behind looking at the human capital as a whole. Because at the end of the day, when we are talking about demography, we are talking about the human capital to run the economy, to run the social sector, to run the country. And we realized there was this forgotten human capital in the country. So when we started with this program, then we realized the other side, which was children in difficult circumstances, children in conflict with law, and young people abusing substance. They all were disempowered, stigmatized, shunned. The system, the traditional system, did not see a value in them. And then we came in with the Forgotten Human Capital Project to really look and harness and empower that potential. Why did we do it? The numbers were very clear. We had 67.7% of our incarcerated people were below 35 years old, very productive. They could be meaningfully engaged. Second, economic and social empowerment and healing through skilling and upskilling and counseling, giving them a purpose in life to contribute to their own families, to their communities, to the nation at large. And in the end, what are we trying to do? Is we are trying to bring in this idea of restorative justice and social protection for the most vulnerable. Because you have the wider system that takes care of everybody else. But what about the bottom 10%? What about the bottom 2%? And that's where we came in with our program. Now, we also had the economic angle to it. Government spends almost 143 million on prison upkeep. So we wanted to also offset that cost through these interventions. So the idea behind BRAVE, we call it, the Bhutan Reintegration and Value Enhancement Program, is to empower individuals, strengthen families, and healing communities. Because when we look at the demographic spectrum, we can either increase birth, reduce mortality, or manage what is in the middle. Increasing birth is not in our hand. Just in my lifetime, the cost of raising kid has gone up. So government cannot demand saying, please have 3 kids or 5 kids. It's beyond the control. Because in Bhutan, we also respect the individual autonomy. Families to make their own decision when to have kids, right? And reducing mortality, we are sort of working on it in terms of integration of promoting healthy aging programs, having policies on disability, enhancing our health system, all that. But what about one in the middle? And that's where we came in to really say, okay, there's something that we can do about it. Because in the end, when we look at demography, any change in demography affects the very fabric of a country, future of that country. Like I mentioned in the morning, for Bhutan, we have basically within the health sector, we can count our doctors on our fingertips. We have one cardiologist, and tomorrow if he decides to leave, the whole cardiac services collapses, right? So empowerment, and whether we're talking about empowerment through skilling, upskilling, for Bhutan, every individual matters. Again, because of our size, because we are small. So in the end, through this program, we really wanted to show that we need to look beyond the traditional human capital. Yes, investing in children is important. Yes, investing in education is important. Yes, investing in elderly who are able to work longer hours, healthy aging, absolutely. But investing in the most vulnerable is also equally important. Equally important. And that really defines who we are as a nation. I call this project mainstreaming happiness. Happiness for everybody, well-being for everybody, leaving no one behind. And these are the ideas that we grew up with as in the health sector, the visionary ideas of leaving no one behind. And we are trying to translate that vision into reality. And while we are doing that, we are also very mindful of economic inclusiveness. So when we're talking about economic opportunities, we're also talking about economic opportunities that is inclusive, equitable, that is for everyone, right? And then, of course, we're also looking at the forgotten human capital as a force to contribute towards labor participation. And ultimately, the very value that we believe in is equity and a trust in the state, that the state will also take care of you, right? The state will not shun you. The state will not stigmatize you, but state will also be there to hold you and pull you up when you're down. And ultimately, at the global level, we are also looking at this as a pilot for innovating in the criminal justice system. Is punishment the solution? Or is empowerment a solution? Because ultimately, what do you want? We don't want people to be locked up in prison and do nothing, right? So the system itself is designed in such a way that they go through, we call it the 3H strategy, changing their heads, heart, and hands, skilling them, equipping them, hand-holding them, so that when upon their release, they are able to reintegrate back into the society. For me, is the story of forgiveness, love, compassion. And I think these are the values that needs to be mainstreamed in our policies and in our decisions. Whether we are a politician, whether we are a technocrat, whether we are an implementer or a donor. I think these are values that are so important, so dear to our heart when we talk about equity, when we talk about equity and justice. And not just for a few, but for the masses, and especially for the most vulnerable. So this is a project that we're working on. Is it the solution to everyone? Does it work everywhere? I don't know. I don't have an answer. But this is a project that we believed in because of our core principle of cross-national happiness. Because we believe in this idea of well-being, and well-being not just for a few, but for everyone, everywhere. Thank you.
I will stay in my seat the next time, but I do have to say I smiled when you said mainstreaming happiness. That felt beautiful, and it's rare that you see a policymaker, a practitioner, someone in a political space and beyond center and ask the question of what about the bottom 10%, the last 10%? How beautiful it is to start thinking from that end and then working out. Thank you for grounding us. Thank you for bringing heart to work that impacts a population, a community, and our global ecosystem. I just do want to take the liberty to give you 1 minute, Dachan, to please introduce yourself. I talked about your title, but there's so many nuggets there that let the audience just know in a minute a little bit about who you are.
Thank you. I like to say that I'm a very strong advocate for public health. and social justice. That's how I would like to describe myself. But of course, I've worn many hats. I've worked in many countries in the region as consultants. Most recently, I was the Minister of Health for the Royal Government of Bhutan. I was elected by my people to on a health agenda. I was the minister when we had COVID, so you all are, please don't feel sorry for me. But I had a wonderful journey there. Now, currently, I head the mental health agenda, which is, again, another forgotten agenda. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Please give it up for Dachan one more time. So we canvassed from Bhutan all the way to India. I'm really excited about our next speaker, Poonam, who offers a different lens, where national frameworks enshrine rights, but perhaps subnational realities often tell another story. So Poonam will walk us through India's mixed experience in population policy and what decades of evidence tell us about unintended consequences, especially for women and especially for those living on the margins. Please help me in welcoming Poonam, and Poonam, please do introduce yourself so that we know who stands before us. Thank you so much.
Otherwise, I'll just say I'm Poonam. Thank you. It is indeed an honor, and I'm very grateful for this invitation and to have an opportunity to talk about population issues in a public health conference. So I've spent the last 4 decades focusing on gender issues. From wherever I worked on livelihoods, rights, and gender issues and values followed or accompanied my thinking, my work. I'm founder of several non-government organizations in India, and I had the privilege of setting up NGOs, giving the baby to better people to run and moving on. Finally, I've spent the last 30 years as country director, MacArthur Foundation, and then head of Population Foundation in India, which is an NGO. We call ourselves a foundation, but we are an NGO. And I want to say that my heart lies in ensuring every woman has a choice, dignity, and right, and that public health and rights are correlated. And finally, I'd like to say I'm an activist at heart, a policy buff in my head, as well as strategist. That's enough, right? Okay, great. So India's mixed experience is the dignified title I gave this presentation, but if I really wanted to say the truth, I would have said schizophrenic. Everything that came as a result of the survey we did from our distinguished audience here actually fits into India's experience. So the next slide. Am I using the slides or are you? Okay, great. So Population Foundation of India was, next slide please, was founded 50 years ago or 54 years ago by an eminent visionary, J.R.D. Tata, an industrialist. PFI works on strategy that combines strategic engagement with policymakers, media, key influencers, and supports for community-led accountability in health, knowledge generation, dissemination, use of technology, scaling of pilot projects, and social and behavior change communication. We work closely with the state government, but we also, governments in India, but we also work with the central government, and we believe scaling up through government is the way to go. Next slide, please. So population policies, as was said in the introduction, are usually described in neutral language, but they sit at the intersection of politics, morality, control, and most importantly, gender inequality. Whether policies aim to raise or lower fertility, the ethical question to ask is the same. Do they expand people's choice or restrict them? India is particularly a complex and revealing case because multiple value systems operate, unlike the wonderful country of Bhutan. A large country with a 1.4 billion population, at the national level, India formally introduces reproductive justice, rights, and informed choice. The language has been replaced since 1994 as a result of the ICPD, Population and Development Conference. But the state and local level, we are something quite different. Even coercive measures, moral regulation of family size, and now in some regions, explicit concern by political leaders that people are not having enough children and their state will lose political representation in the parliament through a delimitation exercise which is based on the number of people in a constituency. It's a big elephant in the room in India today, in the country, and it's going to happen in 2027, and you will see a big war on this happening within the country. Over the past few decades, India's demographic profile has undergone a significant transition. In 1976, women had 5 children. In 1950, we had 6 children, and today, an average child an Indian woman has is 2. The total wanted fertility rate, which is an indicator of the number of children a woman desires in India, is 1.6. The mismatch between desired and actual fertility underscores the real issue, which is not population growth or decline, whether people, especially women, can truly make choices about their reproductive choice. This raises a fundamental question for this session: whose values shape population policy, and who pays the price when those values are imposed through the state without engagement of the citizens or their happiness indicators. In India, the course has been very uneven, hugely uneven, in fact, I'd say, falling mostly heavily on women and poor and marginalized communities. Next, please. So India launched the world's first national family planning program in 1952. Correct me if I'm wrong, but it was the first country to launch a program. And this was grounded in the belief that high fertility threatened India's economic growth in future. In the 70s, fertility reduction was framed as essential for economic development. Women were nowhere in the consideration, and this culminated in emergency in India in 1977 when we paid a very heavy price for coercive population policies. The turning point, as I said earlier, came in 1994. India formally shifted away from family planning targets towards a rights-based approach, having signed one of the 189 countries that signed the ICPD draft plan of action. But the national population policy of 2000 was voluntary, family planning, informed choice, etc. A comprehensive approach for population stabilization. However, many states prioritize numeric achievements, and fertility continues to be framed, to be managed by the state. The result is a hybrid system where progressive policy coexists with mindsets that are regressive and population bomb and control mindsets. Next, please. despite a rights-based national framework, several Indian states have adopted a two-child norm, in fact, 11 states. But believe me, it's not for the national politicians or the state level, it's only for the grassroots panchayats, which is the district level and block level leaders. These policies rest on moral judgment, that smaller families are more deserving of political rights and state support. They are governance tools, not evidence-based public health measures. I'd call them policy-based evidence-making, and often ignored access to contraception, education, and healthcare. Evidence from India and globally clearly shows that coercive population policies do not work. They do not sustain or reduce fertility. Instead, they lead to unintended and harmful consequences, including adverse sex ratios, unsafe abortion, and exclusion of the poorest from public life and services. China followed. The question that some people may ask is, China had the one-child policy, which did succeed in coercive measures, but why did India not succeed and had a backlash for coercive measures? We are a democracy. So the question to the group is, why did it work in China? Anybody? Well, it's not a democracy. I'm not going to use the word the state of the political ideology, but let me move on. So coercive policies fail because they misread people, why people want to have children or not. Fertility decisions are shaped by insecurity, gender norms, lack of old age support, son preference, and women's limited control and over contraception, not incentives or penalties alone. Coercion ignores these factors. In fact, instead burdens women's bodies as well as their health, mental, physical, and emotional. There is a key demographic lesson here. And the lesson is coercive policies rarely change overall outcomes, but they worsen inequality and undermine health systems. Next, please. So if you look at India population size, we estimates, PFI, the NGO I work for, has estimated that we'll reach 1.59 billion by 2051. Many states, especially in the south and west, are already below 1.8. These states have growing aging populations in the next decades as per our projections. And low fertility alongside unmet need signals a lack of agency, not access to choice, celebrating declining fertility while ignoring persistent gaps in autonomy and access reflects a value system that prioritizes outcomes over lived experiences, especially of women. Next slide, please. Gender and social norms affect the fertility and health outcomes of girls and women, whether it's marriage, norms around marriage, early marriage, son preference, the lack of mobility in decision-making restrictions, and gender-based violence, of course. Fertility regulation in India overwhelmingly targets women. 65% of the modern contraception is based on female sterilization, very little involvement, responsibility, or engagement of men. These technical arguments basically often mask these deeply gendered assumptions. These norms directly affect health outcomes, access to services for women's participation in decision-making. We cannot fix fertility outcomes without confronting these norms. Next, please. We are seeing a rhetorical shift, specifically in southern states of India. While fertility is low and population aging is visible, political leaders have begun publicly encouraging women to have more children, citing future labor shortages, etc., just like Russia, China, South Korea, Japan, and Italy too. This is a familiar pattern women are viewed instrumentally on as solutions to demographic concerns without corresponding investments in childcare, shared care work, enabling environment or gender equality, and we have much to learn from the Nordic countries here. Whether anti-natalist or pro-natalist, policies fail when they treat fertility as a lever to be pulled rather than an outcome shaped by social conditions and individuals. Next. So, in the states where we've had the two-child norm and coercive policies through active media engagement, advocacy with state governments, PFI actively shifted the conversation away from numbers and penalties towards women's rights, health, and agency, underscored India's commitment to ICPD, and we highlighted state-specific advantages and disadvantages in population policies. The next slide. The demographic trends are not just numbers. They reflect actual experiences, aspirations, and policy choices. Finally, and today, few trends are as consequential as global decline in fertility rates. Left unchecked, panic about population can lead to policies and programs that are costly, ineffective, at best compromise health and worse rights. Finally, the last slide, please. I want to share a clip at the end of a few comments. Can I make a few comments before I show the clip?
Absolutely.
So behavior change and changing social norms is a key area that we need to focus on. And we at PFI, we did a program called Main Kuch Bhi Kar Sakti Hu. I, a woman, can achieve anything. It's a SBC approach to address social and gender norms. This entertainment education initiative is a 360-degree approach, as you can see, and several programmatic and research technical innovations in 3 successful seasons. The show had a viewership of 150 million people, and we reached 900 million people through our social handle media. Main Kuch Bhi Kar Sakti has been able to make a difference based on evaluations, and I'm leaving you with a powerful clip from Main Kuch Bhi Kar Sakti on early and forced child marriage. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. A warm round of applause for Poonam. I wonder, I know given time, perhaps, I don't know how long the clip is, but maybe we can. Okay.
हमने सुना है तुम लडुआ बहुत अच्छे बनाती हो।
सीखना पड़ता है। गुण अच्छे नहीं होंगे तो कौन ब्याह हमसे?
दीदी हम इससे ब्याह करेंगे। हमको ये बहुत पसंद है।
पसंद तो हम सभी को आते हैं, पर ना हमारी कुंडली में
ये लड़की मांगलिक है। कौन दोष है इसमें? चलो यहाँ से।
बाबूजी,
ब्याह तय हो गया तुम्हारा। बंद करो ये खेल।
ये वही बच्ची मीठी है जिसका जबरदस्ती बाल विवाह उसके माँ बाप ने करा दिया। शादी के बाद उसके पति का एक्सीडेंट हो गया, वो बहुत सीरियस है।
मनपूर से ये लड़की अपने बेटवा के साथ बंधन जुड़ दे, उसके साथ ये हादसा हो गया।
आपके बेटे को बचा नहीं पाए।
विधवा धर्म है कि जो जी और जीव को अच्छा लगे उसका त्याग करना।
आपने हमारी जबरदस्ती शादी की। हम तो पढ़ना लिखना चाहते थे।
क्या करेगी पढ़ लिख कर? प्रधानमंत्री बनेगी?
हाँ, बनूंगी मैं प्रधानमंत्री।
Thank you so much. Oh, is this working? Is this working? It's working, right? Thank you. A bit more energy. Please give it up for our first two speakers. The world is a better place because of Dechan and Poonam. The heart, the passion, your dedication is brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing your insights this morning. So now, you know, there's space between folks, but please, the person to your right or your left, just check in on them and how they're doing, and perhaps spend 30 seconds sharing one word that describes how population policy has affected your health system. 30 seconds. Person next to you, let's have a quick chat. So you can say hello. If you don't have, find somebody. It could be as simple as how are you doing? How does you know? One word or a few words that describe how population policy has affected your health system. Feel free to be friendly. Turn to the back. Say hello. Professor Bump, behind you. Say hello. All right, 10 more seconds. All righty, thank you. We did have, if we can all come back to the middle. Oh, people are now really having full-on conversations. I love this. So for those still exchanging, could we all come back? Thank you. We definitely wanted to. Oh no, now people are friends now. Oh Lord. Hello. It's really important when you're in space with folks to just really just acknowledge who is next to you. So I'm glad that I see some friendships forming right there. But I'm trying to be mindful of time, but for those that said hello and for those that had a very brief discussion, can someone perhaps share a comment or a question that we can reserve for later? Just one before we go to the next set. Anyone would like to stand behind the mic and perhaps share one word that describes how population policy may affect your health system based on the two conversations heard? Okay. No? Going once? Okay. All right. Well, hold your thoughts and your questions and we'll circle back. So, we've heard about well-being as a framework and about the consequences when policy and practice diverge. And now we take a wider lens to Asia, a region of demographic extremes and deep anxiety about the future. Very low fertility in some contexts, rapid aging, high immigration, and perhaps a bit of anxiety about future economic and geopolitical roles. But as we hear this, maybe the anxiety may be the wrong starting point. Professor Stuart Gaitel-Basten will challenge us to think beyond fertility alone, and he will challenge us to consider mortality, well-being, and capabilities as central demographic pathways. So please help me, because I think we're a very generous and warm group of folks, in welcoming Professor Stuart. Over to you.
Thank you so much. So for my introduction, I'm a demographer. It's a little bit humble after I think all the wonderful things that we've heard from our panel so far, but I'm a demographer. But don't panic, I'm not going to do the typical demography thing, and also people who are not demographers, but of making a big graph to the end of the century and tell you that, oh my, this is a disaster, everything's terrible, here's fertility rates, here's population pyramids, the world is going to collapse. This is not my style, right? I'm a slightly different kind of demographer. I am a cautiously optimistic demographer to frame this before. Okay, so I've got 15 minutes to talk about population policy in Asia. Well, that's a bit tough because Asia's kind of big and a bit complicated and very diverse. And as you can see here, we have some of the lowest fertility rates, and we've got some very high ones. We've got very high life expectancy. We've got very low ones. We've got very old populations, very young populations. Asia is big and complicated and an incredible place. So I am not going to be able, if you've come here to get something on Afghan population policy or Yemeni population policy or Kyrgyz, I'm afraid I can't do that for you, right? We can't cover the nuances of everything. But one thing which is a kind of very common overarching theme, which we see in many different parts of Asia, is this concern about population aging, about population growth, and particularly slow growth, stagnation into population decline. And in some places, this is like an existential panic, right? The notion that Korea is going to run out of Koreans because of very low fertility rate, right? But also, of course, this is exaggerated by high emigration rates. And of course, some places put the two together, and that makes it a little bit challenging. Of course, we've seen the scary looking graphs of population decline to the end of the century. And in some places, this is very big economies looking at very big scales of population decline, and also these kind of extreme age pyramids as well. However, it's also in countries and territories where fertility is actually, it's not so low, but there is a panic, right? There is a concern because countries are looking at these other places with very low fertility, very rapid aging, and are kind of frightened by that. So already bringing in sometimes pronatalist policies. So of course, as demographers, we know that there is always an interaction between changing population size and structure and characteristics with all kinds of economic and social things like health systems, social welfare, productivity, geopolitical roles, and so on. And the pace and scale of change makes a big difference. And this is one of the kind of remarkable things about Asia is compared to Europe, for example, just how fast our demographic transition has occurred. It's very fast and it's very deep. And it's made responses to that, institutional responses, actually quite tough, quite difficult. Now, it's all very well and it's nice for us to be here and we talk about equity and doing the best thing and doing wonderful things. But in the real world, yeah, we just have more babies. This is the way the typical political or policy maker or the public discourse looks about this. So hang on, we've got aging and decline. That's because we're not having enough babies. Let's have more babies. It's as simple as that. Why do we need this complex discussion about rights and equity and stuff like that? We just have more babies. And in some places, let's have some migration as well. And of course, we see various different policies across the region going from, pronatalism in a relatively soft way. So pronatalism as a kind of underlying message, but with some family policy directions, which we see here in Thailand, in Southeast Asia, in China, in other parts, certainly in Korea, South Korea, Japan. But then also we move to what you might call more aggressive types of pronatalism, which are, we might see in places like Turkey, or probably the most aggressive would be in Iran. Okay, where a lot of pushback on sexual and reproductive health and rights, and it's linked into gender conservatism and so on. Now, the only problem with pronatalism, actually, there's a lot of problems with pronatalism. So it doesn't, well, the first thing, it don't work, right? That's the first big problem, which is always amazing. Politicians love things that work. And I don't know why they keep going, because it doesn't work. The funny thing is, when a government tells you we need more babies to fix the pension system, most people go, well, I'm not going to do that for you. Sorry, I've got other things on my mind. only tends to affect when people have the children they are already going to have, right? This is what we know. It takes a long time. Babies, unfortunately, are quite lazy. Babies don't work. Babies don't pay tax. You've got to wait 25 years for them, and now they're going to want to do a master's degree, so they're not going to join the labor force until 2050, by which time the pension system is going to be broke. So, you know, it's just not really not the best way of doing this. And it's also very kind of complex mechanisms. But also, of course, for our purposes of our session here, the values are all out, right? This is about old-fashioned 20th century population policy, right? The utilitarian approach, we're going to instrumentalize reproductive labor for macroeconomic ends, right? And I would just politely say we have legacy issues, right, about antinatalist policies in the past. They don't really end well sometimes, most of the time. And of course, when we talk about restricting choices and stigma and creating stigma, and also the hypocrisy. We want more babies, but mainly not those kind of babies, right? We want more babies, right? And this is a big problem which comes up as well. So rightly, we've moved towards a kind of micro-level reproductive justice, reproductive agency agenda within demography. Migration, on the other hand, is very, very effective, extremely effective. But you know what? No one likes it. Well, no, migrants like it, but policymakers and in the popular realm, this is very difficult. Right? It's very difficult to propose migration as a means of offsetting or of slowing down demographic change. And so again, in demography, we tend to move more towards improving processes and rights and so on and so forth, rather than seeing migration as what it could really be, which is a means of slowing the pace and scale of demographic change. So then we can say fertility policies and migration policies are, let's just say, problematic in terms of being able to mitigate the pace and scale of demographic change. So what we've tended to do, I think, as demographers, is now we don't talk about this anymore, and instead our paradigm is about mitigating the effects of demographic change. So concentrating on institutional reforms, institutional changes, but also precisely the kind of things that we've heard so far about capabilities, well-being, invested in health, human capital, skills, labor force participation, active aging, and so on. And in the way that this would impact on the characteristics of the population, and therefore make these institutional reforms better, these pinch points less extreme. But in this sense, we've kind of forgotten about demographic mitigation, right? We don't tend to work on this or talk about this so much. It's become taboo, I think, in some ways, right? And rightly so, because of the context in which it's discussed. Now, to slightly pivot a little bit here, so I do a lot of work, mainly my work is on very low fertility in East Asia, and I do a lot of work in South Korea, which, as you may know, has got pretty much the lowest fertility rate in the world. They're in a fight with Hong Kong, but, you know, we can let them win this one, that's okay. It's about 0.7. I don't know why on this image here, to show how terrible low fertility is, they've actually managed to find the only family in Korea with 1, 2, 3, 4 kids. But anyway, it doesn't matter. This is an unusual thing. But so we have very, very low fertility. Now, you may have read, though, last year there was an increase in fertility. We were very excited because the fertility rate went from 0.73 to 0.76 or something like this. So we have the lowest fertility rate in the world. Korea also has the highest suicide rate in the world. And the increase in suicides actually almost offset the increase in births. So this kind of made me to think, well, if Korea is spending all of this time and energy on getting people to have more children, what would happen if they actually spent the same amount of energy in preventing people from dying earlier, right? So what is the demographic consequence of this? Now, of course, then I talked to my wonderful colleagues and collaborators over there, Sergey and Tuma, who are going to give us a nice big wave. Well, they're embarrassed now, but anyway, no, sorry. And, you know, who actually reminded me, well, suicide is only a very small part of preventable mortality. So what about the context of mortality, of improving mortality? And you will see in your conference bag, in the WHO bulletin, our nice article here. And so we say, well, instead of doing the typical thing, which is, well, what would happen to population if we really increase the fertility rate? our approach is, well, what would happen to the population if we go to a best practice of mortality? Let's drop mortality to Japanese levels. And it could be Italian or Spanish or Hong Kong or Korea. It doesn't really matter, right? Let's really invest in mortality reduction. And as you see in the article, we actually did it for Europe, and the impact is very, very strong. Okay? And this is particularly important in places where, like Russia, where you have very, very strong pronatalist policy. Well, actually, if they invested in mortality reduction, there wouldn't be, the impact would be much greater than improving the increase in fertility rates. And that, and then, but so we go to the other kind of more, to pronatalist places that I talked about before. Yes, in Thailand and in China, the impact of increasing fertility on total population size will be much greater, but it ain't going to happen. Fertility is not going to go to 2.1. And this is apart from all the problematic values, ethics, and so on that we talked about. So just by improving mortality, population decline, which is this huge panic, will pretty much stop. It will pretty much stop. And then we go to Turkey and Iran, where there is extremely strong investment in pronatalism. And of course, the first thing you might note, the country is still going to grow anyway. So why are they so concerned about it? This is why this is not a demographic concern. This is a values concern. This is a gender conservatism, a control concern here. But again, even when we have very high investment in pronatalism, which isn't working and won't work, investment in mortality has a greater demographic consequence. And in other places across Asia, I'm a demographer, I've got to put up graphs, I'm sorry. But, so Armenia, Vietnam, Malaysia, India, and Nepal, all places where, we're not quite at true pronatalism yet, but there's anxiety, right? We're getting there, right? It's not going to be far off. Again, investment in mortality has a tremendous demographic impact, and in some cases, a greater impact than investing in pronatalism or kind of blind pronatalism. So therefore, we would say, well, if we are concerned about the pace and scale of aging and stagnation and decline, then health and mortality is a neglected pathway which we should actually put back into population policy. And of course, it's unlikely, but it shows potential and has got a more valid target. And of course, the nice thing is that it addresses these macro level demographic concerns about growth and productivity and pensions and institutional systems, but it's also, people don't want to die, right? People want to stay alive and be healthier for longer. So it aligns with the individual rights-based. It's more ethical. We're able to have a broader coalition. It really neuters these pronatalist arguments. If a policymaker says, well, our population is going to decline, the only thing we can do about it is have more babies, then we can say, well, no, that's not the case. No, right? If you're genuinely worried about population decline, there are plenty of other ways that we can address that. And of course, the other nice thing is that, part of the reasons why pronatalist policies don't work is because the pathways to having children are extremely complex. If it was the case that people said, well, having children is expensive, people do say, and then the government says, well, here's $10,000, but then you still don't have children, right? Because it's not just about money. There's so many other different pathways. We actually do know how to make preventable mortality better. The pathways are much clearer. We understand the policy systems, the policy frameworks, the ways to do things. Yes, resources is an issue. Of course, resources is an issue, but the actual processes are clear, right? And there is an optimal. We can see what an optimal is, right? It's not easy, but it can be done. So therefore, to kind of draw this to a close, my goal then, or my suggestion, is that of course we've got to do this. Of course we've got to have institutional reform. Of course we've got to invest hugely in improving capabilities and well-being and not leaving anybody behind, making sure that every single person, aligned with ICPD, every single person is able to meet their full potential in all aspects of their life. There's no doubt about that. But we can bring a little demography back into this. So it's not just about mitigating the impact of demographic change, but we can also mitigate demographic change itself through mortality reduction. Now, in some places where mortality is already very low, this is not going to make any difference, right? But in those places, then we need to have a realistic, honest conversation about migration. So therefore, what I would like to close with is the idea that, population policy in the past and today has got a really bad name because it did a lot of terrible things were done in the name of population policy. So much so that it's almost become a bit taboo. We don't want to talk about it. It's safer for us to retreat into just capabilities, well-being, institutional reform. This is all very important and it's true, but we've still got to be able to give the policymaker something who looks at the graph that goes to the end of the century and gets in a panic. And one of the things that we can do is to say, well, mortality reduction is a way to mitigate the pace and scale of demographic change. It's about reclaiming and reframing population policy and to say that actually the top-down concerns, the macroeconomic concerns and the micro-level concerns are not mutually exclusive. And the thing is, if we don't do this, other people who are less circumspect than us, who have other motives than us, and we see them around the world at the moment, not mentioning any names or any countries, they will step into that space. So we really have to reclaim population policy for the good of all. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Stewart. A warm round of applause. Thank you so much for that. Thank you for challenging, or rather reframing, demographic thinking, and really moving from that level of uncertainty to capability and from control to care. So our final speaker, stay with us, brings us to Africa, where population discourse has too often been shaped from outside rather than from within. Aissata Fall will reflect on what it means to govern demographic change in Africa with ethics, care, and evidence at the center, and what it takes to design population policies that strengthen rather than burden health systems. Please help me in welcoming Aissata Fall. And please do introduce yourself as well, Aissata. Thank you.
Hi. Thank you for being there. So my name is Aissata Fall. I'm from Mali and France, Mali, West Africa, and I'm based in Dakar, Senegal. I work for Population Reference Bureau, but I come from Democratic Dialogue. And I'm not a demographer, I'm not an economist, I'm not a researcher, which is important because I spend my time with researchers and people call me doctor, and I don't want to steal any title, and I'm very proud not to be one, sorry. Because I'm exactly the guinea pigs that say to people, it is really interesting, but I really don't know how to use it, and I build bridges. I build bridges between researchers and civil society or any stakeholders that is part of decision-making. I fight a lot explaining people that policy decision-making is not only made in ministries, but also in national assemblies and also at the local level. I hate this word, but at the decentralized level, because it's a dynamics, and it is also where citizens are thinking about the solutions they need. In the spaces where they can be active, budgetary spaces and the municipality, for example, this is where people also need to be informed. And what Stuart just presented is so interesting, really. And all what I've heard, and I'm not an activist, I'm really a technician, but actually for me what is important is this is the things I need to understand when I'm going to vote, for example. How can I understand what all these people that are representing me are doing or saying? And from my experience during the last 3 decades, more than that, it was really super interesting, but also powerful to help citizens to really get the data and use evidence to better understand what was said on the policy side, and also try to express themselves. If you go, I don't know if it's the right name, but in France, we said if you go to China, you need to speak Chinese, okay? So if you want to talk to policymakers, try to speak their language, because this is what power is, and data is very powerful. So I'm not gonna tell a story about something what happened when I was invited for this meeting. We were invited to reflect on ethics using the framework proposed by Velez and colleagues, which was a great article, but very a researcher one. Actually, it was very interesting because it forced me to think differently about the policies we were discussing, and this with the question of the Population policy also was interesting because I was like, is there a population policy in my country? I wasn't sure. And I tried to find a document called population policy, which does not exist. And when people hear policies, they think about a policy to implement. And when we talk about population policy, for example, we forget that it's a result. It's not a model to implement. It's a result of some outcome or some goals that very, very few people can understand, very, very few people can look at a general framework. And having this framework about values and ethics was very interesting for me as a bridge builder to help any game changer to really improve policies. Demographic and health policies are, and I'm going to read because I'm not an native English speaker, so it's reassuring for me, except if you accept me to speak in French. So demographic and health policies are usually presented as technical, data-driven, and neutral. This is what you said. They are supposed to, in their implementation. And this is important to think about implementation. Even when their objectives are openly debated, people can disagree on the objectives of population policies, but they are defined and presented as neutral. And today, I would like to discuss about the fact that they are also deeply normative, even when they do not explicitly say so. So they rest on implicit judgments about what society considers acceptable, desirable, and also normal. This normality, this norms is something that is not discussed, that has some very heavy consequences, and some of my colleagues were presenting this morning what's said in the society and how it has direct implications without never being discussed. So ethics is not only about stated objectives, but it is also about what remains implicit. So who does what and who bears which cost and under which assumptions. So to see this clearly, we first need to shift the usual ethical framing. And ethical debates on population policies are often framed around pro versus antinatalist divide. And that was a good question. The first question on the Menti was, is in your settings a population policy pro and antinatalist? And I was like, well, I cannot answer because a part of what I see is maybe pro-natalist, another one is clearly antinatalist because we don't have access to this or this policy. So it's totally impossible in my settings to decide if it is pro or con. And it's not the point, actually. That is not absolutely not the point. The result maybe will be pro and antinatalist, but it's totally a non-decided result. It's totally by coincidence that we are going to have this kind of result, I think. So the framing matters. It addresses explicitly choices about fertility rights and policy instruments when we discuss about pro and antinatalist divide. But it leaves aside another crucial question: how policies actually operate in everyday life. And I don't want to replace the debate about pro and antinatalist, okay? I just want to complement it by shifting the ethical lens, because even when priorities or when objectives are widely shared, ethics doesn't stop there. Across context, including Africa, policy objectives are largely consensual: health, autonomy, equity, development. Nobody is against that. It's normal to say this is what we are aiming for. But from an ethical standpoint, these goals are rarely contested. The real ethical question for me is, under what social and institutional conditions can this goal be achieved? And this is where this framework that was advised, the Velez one, is really helpful, because it distinguishes values linked to objectives from values linked to embedded in implementation. And this is where care, which is what I work on care and pet care work and care economy and the gender aspect. This is where care, interestingly, enters in the picture. many demographic and health policies rely on an implicit assumption that the daily work of social reproduction will be carried out by households. Nobody questions that. You set some goals for your policy and you suppose that the rest is going to be just natural, because I love what Stuart said with this old-fashioned 20th centuries, well, I would say policies in general, way of managing or way of governance. It has changed. And some countries in Asia are good examples about social reproduction and how women are saying, we are not the right machine anymore. So, childcare, elder care, continuity of treatment, or compensating for service gaps, this work is taken for granted. And it is real, it is material, and it is indispensable for policy outcomes. And yet it remains largely invisible in policy design, in data system, and in budgets. Policy succeeds because this work is done and not because it is recognized. When care is invisible, the costs do not disappear, they are just displaced. Constraints that are not acknowledged at policy level are absorbed by households and especially by women. Equity may be stated as a guided principle, while inequalities are reproduced through unspoken cost transfers. So ethics here is not about intentions. It is really about who bears the burden. And ethics is not only in objectives, it is in the bill. It is in who pays, who absorbs the cost. And the cost is not randomly distributed. Unpaid care work is overwhelmingly carried out by women, especially women of working age. The problem is not a lack of gender language. There is plenty of it. But the problem is that care work is not treated as a material constraint in policy analysis. So gender here reveals a structural dependency of policies on an unrecognized collective resource. So gender here is not the problem itself. It reveals a non-recognized form of collective work, which is totally ignored and invisible. And this externalization is particularly visible in health systems. A significant share of care is produced by households, long-term care, treatment adherence, patient accompaniment. Yet this production is absent from health system performance metrics. As a result, we evaluate health systems without accounting for what makes them function. Ethically, it distorts how effectiveness and sustainability are assessed. Policies are also guided by technical values: efficiency, cost effectiveness, and feasibility, but these values are entirely dependent on what is measured. Because unpaid care work is not counted, it becomes politically invisible, and policies can appear efficient on paper while relying on hidden household costs. What is not measured is rarely debated. What is not debated is rarely budgeted, and what is not budgeted remains totally outside the scope of the public action. So this matters in Africa because demographic change is unfolding in societies that are overwhelming young. 70% of the population is below 35, 50% of the population is below 20 years old. So in such context, the ethical question is not only what outcomes policy produces, but who has the capacity to understand and influence the choices being made. Sorry. When most of the population is young, demographic policies are not technical adjustment. They are decisions about long-term collective futures. Governing demographic change, therefore, requires more targets than targets and indicators. It requires political capacity. The capacity to make trade-offs visible, the capacity to debate them publicly, and then to assume collective responsibility for their consequences. So the ethical issue becomes one of political capacity, the capacity to assume collective responsibility. And the key issue is not demography alone, but the capacity to govern demographic change. And the key change in Africa today is not demographics alone, but how societies are only beginning to build that capacity. So tools from national transfer account, national transfer account, demographic dividend, budgeting are really, and time use data, for example, are really important because they support this capacity, not because they provide better numbers, but because they make implicit choices visible and discussable. So my argument is not against family planning or pro-natalist. I'm not taking side in the pro or anti-natalist debates. That debate is important because it makes implicit choices about fertility goals and about the instruments used to influence them, laws, incentive, or reproductive health programs, for example. Here, I'm shifting the ethical lens alongside that debate and not inside it. Even when objectives are shared, health, right, autonomy, we agreed all on that, the ethical question does not end here. It extends to how these objectives are implemented and under what conditions they become effective. So the focus moves from stated goals to implementation conditions, from intentions to coherence, and from rights in principle to the distribution of cost in practice, because this is where you see if the rights are respected or not. What I'm questioning here is whether policies that claim to invest in people are coherent with the social and institutional arrangements that actually make those investments possible. And this is where the ethical issue lies, in my opinion. So, ethical reflection on demographic policy is not about choosing between doctrines. It is about making visible the values already shaping policy choices, especially those that remain implicit. Equity cannot be assessed only through access or aggregated indicators. It must be assessed through the real distribution of work, of cost, and responsibilities. As long as care remains invisible, equity remains partial. So making values explicit means asking not only what we aim to achieve, but how and who ultimately bears the cost. Thank you.
Thank you so much. A very, very warm round of applause one more time for Aissata and the entire panel of speakers. Thank you for really deepening this conversation, providing very practical examples. And sometimes when we say practical examples, I feel like, just very concrete examples. And at the same time, also interrogating some of these terms that I think sometimes can be a bit aloof and theory-lating. What do we mean by equity? What do we mean by population policy? So thank you for really unpacking and bringing such nuance. We want to open the floor. We are in conversation. And so please, if you have a question or perhaps a reflection, please do stand behind the mic and let's really begin to have this conversation. And we also have a couple of questions for the panelists here, but we really want to open the floor to everyone here so that you're belly full before you go to lunch, belly full in inspiration and just exchange. And then, of course, I know that lunch is after. Also, if you would rather just submit your question anonymously, just hit the QR code and we'll also look to the Mentimeter for questions. So I'll stop here and just check in. How is everyone doing? I like that word. Thank you, sir. Excellent is a good one. And are there any questions? Yeah, please go ahead. And you can also you can direct it to anyone on the panel or all the panelists.
Hi everyone, my name is Haitham Anosh. Thanks for the great insights. To the researcher, the demographer here in the panel, we are very obsessed about efficiency in everything. But when migration is the most efficient response to this, we have a problem. Why is that?
racism and xenophobia, I suppose, are simple answers in some cases. I think that, I think that one of the main issues, I think one of the greatest failures, I think, of population policy and of all kinds of political leadership over the last maybe few hundred years, but certainly the last half century, is the complete inability to be honest about the benefits, the economic, the social, cultural benefits of migration. I think it's just, there's been so much of a focus on so many other things. And I think we know all over the world the economic and social tax base, every kind of contribution from migrants, but we also know what kind of policies work. We know what certain particular policies on integration. We know policies on equity around including migrants and giving migrant rights. But it doesn't seem to be done. And I don't entirely understand why. I don't have an easy answer. But apart from the fact that it is easy to just have an other, right? It's easier to have to ground this in a kind of a nationalism or an ethno-nationalism. We see this playing out in fertility policies as well. So I think it's, from that, purely from an efficiency perspective, I think that is the problem, right? It is a lack of political, I think it's just simply a lack of political leadership and a lack of political honesty that's really preventing that from, and an ease of scapegoating and an ease of blaming the other for the other inefficiencies in the system.
Thank you, Stuart. And would you like to, okay, please.
Thank you. Just want to add on something interesting in Africa is that so I'm from West Africa, and you have the free movement of person in this world region, which means wherever you come from, you can cross the border with a simple ID card, study, work, or whatever. Even if you are from Nigeria, which is Anglophone, you can go to Senegal, which is Francophone. But people continue to think demographic transition within the limit of the borders, which makes no sense for me, because how can you just plan anything when people are just moving? And if you go to Senegal, if you ignore all these foreign students, you have a big issue with planning what you need in the university. So when you go to East Africa, or I don't know very well East Africa, but Central Africa, Francophone, if you don't have a passport, and you are not able to pay for a passport and for a visa, you cannot just travel outside of Cameroon or DRC. So this is another issue. But in Africa, we have this African Union roadmap for demographic dividend. And last year, here in Bangkok, there was a national transfer account global meeting. And I was moderating the Africa plenary. And it was about explaining how all these generational economics data are used or not by governments. And it was, and as an African, I'm very proud of what I'm going to say. It was very interesting because after the African plenary, Asian people made an Africa meeting saying, how did you do that? Having this conversation. And Africa was like, well, we just have no choice, okay? Because, yeah, but we have 2 languages on the continent also, only, which really helps people to discuss. And we have this African Union. And it was interesting to see Asian people countries saying, it's very difficult for us to have this evidence used by our government because there is not this collective effort because of the different languages and probably the lack of this roadmap. But the last thing I want to add regarding migration is the capacity to discuss. I'm trying to build the next national transfer account, global Africa meetings this year and global meeting about care, unpaid care work, and migration. In my continent, most of the care workers are going to France because, if you are in France, you have this healthcare worker coming from the East. They don't speak very well French. It's not an issue. When it's about older people, you need people immediately effective and efficient. So West Africans speak French. And naturally, there is this culture of taking care of older people. Whatever you think and you get crazy, you respect and you do it. And anyone that have an old person in this institution in France saying. Same for Anglophone West Africans that are going to do this care work in the US, for example. on my continent, there is no one in the government that is able to discuss this, and then that is able to discuss this chosen migration policies. Our government are not equipped to discuss care and care migration consequences, climate, whatever. Our government are not equipped to have balanced and equitable conversation on the global scene. So I think this is one of the biggest issues, because whatever you say, our people are going to continue to move. It's not going to stop.
Yeah.
So there's the next working age population. So this big issue is also the unbalance of the capacity of discussing and then really planning for the future, and stops looking within the country boundaries that just make no sense. Everything is crossing the borders now, and we don't want people to cross, and we don't want to discuss this honestly.
Thank you, Aissata. And there are a couple of questions that are circulating. So I'll just ask you all to be a bit more succinct, even though this is such a rich conversation. I want to go to Poonam, but just after a little bit, I have a question for you. But Dachan, you've seen this question as I actually would love you to answer two questions in one. I think the question around efficiency, as a former politician, Minister of Health, it would be very interesting to hear your perspective. And then, of course, you see your question here. What options would you offer the imprisoned father, especially when we think about restorative justice?
Thank you. So I will wear my politician hat first. and I just wanted to take up the presentation from my colleague, where we said data is not an issue, but governance is. And that is what we see is the gap between Thank you. Yeah. Perfect. I'm getting the angle right. So what we realize is that there is, silos. When I was a politician, I would say I would give $1 million to buy collaboration, if there is such a thing, a commodity. Because I think we say, let's collaborate, let's coordinate, but the reality is still a silo approach, right? How do we collaborate? How do we coordinate? I think that's the problem. We have data lying somewhere else. We have the academic world that is generating all the data. We have a politician who actually has very little access to that data, right? And then we have implementers who have some, I guess, through certain platforms, certain access to the academic. But all these three needs to come together to discuss issue. So we know that migration works as one of the solutions, or we know that, okay, if we can't produce more babies, let's look at healthy aging, let's look at preventing mortality. But that evidence needs to translate into language that the people who are in the decision making can understand. Right? So you're not going to, my first slide, the graph, it's very interesting because, for the academic world, the graph is good. I need not even explain what is happening. But then I go and show this graph to the constituents. They are lost. So that's where the gap is. Communication and creating platforms where these agencies can converge and have a dialogue, and come to some consensus. Otherwise, I think we still continue to function in silos, and that's where we lose either the quick buys or the best buys or excellent interventions. Becomes a huge challenge.
And just very quickly, I'll implore you to do it within 60 seconds. Could you go back to the first question, please, which was for you directly. What options would you offer the imprisoned father?
I think I love this story. This story is very close to my heart because I think he was the very reason that helped us design the program. So Bhutan has something called an open air prison program. And this was started in 2011. Open air prison, basically you serve 30% of your sentence in prison. And then after that, based on your behavior and performance, then you get to do community work outside. I know most of the Nordic countries have these models. In Bhutan, it was very informal. So people would do community work and contribute towards building a temple, or, do some community work in the village, or some government projects. What we have done is we have skilled them. So this particular father we're talking about, we realized that he's an excellent craftsman. He could very, very good in producing traditional masks. So we skilled him. And today as we speak, we are building a reintegration center on 437 acres of land, where they will be skilled, where they will have opportunity to start entrepreneurship. If they have an excellent idea, they can incubate that idea in the prison setting. And then once they leave, they can replicate that, and we will handhold that project. And so I think for me, the connection with the father is very deep, because he's the one who inspired us to do this project. So when he actually leaves the prison system, he has that dignity and the respect from his family.
It's very powerful. Thank you so much.
That's where he is. He's been trained as one of our master trainers in the prison setting. And I think this is not as good as where we want to be, like some of the Nordic countries, but I think we are getting there. Thank you.
No, thank you. I know we are a little short for time, but before we go back to the Mentimeter, and I have a question for all of you. Are there any questions from the mic? Maybe hearing someone else's voice? Please go ahead. Short and...
Yeah. Well, I'm short. Anyways, I feel like some emerging thought is that there's a thread here that actually information doesn't drive change, right? Sad to be an academic to say that, but social norms, changing of social norms does drive change. But question is, do we have better idea of how we actually make that happen? Because there's always these interventions, right, of how we, advocate and send the message forward. But can we advance that field to actually be able to effectively change social norms and not just try?
And that's a perfect question for you, Poonam.
Thank you for asking that very important question, which is not only important for population policies and gender issues, but it's equally important for education and many of the issues, including solving the perception and politics around migration. So I want to share with you that there is global evidence today that behavior change communication works if done differently, not the traditional IC that was used. MIT is well known for the Poverty Action Lab, but their Media Action Lab is, I think, equally important and significant. And when I heard this report, a global report they did on how the world has wasted money on IC, but entertainment education, which I gave you a little bit of clip of, that's what has worked. And there is evaluations. There is not only evaluations of those of programs, and there's evaluation of the India program that we launched, which you'll see published in many technical journals. Now, the point that I want to make is that there was a time 10, 15 years ago when, or 2 decades ago, sorry, when it was more difficult to change social norms, especially around gender issues. But that has changed because the aspirations of women and girls and the poor, who we call the other half, but they have seen how what is called the better half, in quotes, live through the media, the technology, and the access people have today, has led to a very aspirational Asia, Africa, and much of the developing world too. Our young people aspire same aspirations as the young people in America or Europe. So it is easier to change then social norms. But most importantly, it's not the people's social norms. We need to change the social norms and perceptions and thinking of our politicians, our service providers. One of the things, like in this serial that I just gave a clip of, our main protagonist is a doctor, and we have all the primary health care center as the main center, and we have frontline health workers as our protagonists in the serial. And my goal was not just, it wasn't community as much as changing the social norms around the providers. So there is a lot, and believe me, there's a lot of data you can access and evidence you can access. And I, as somebody for 40 years, was feeling very frustrated. I've never worked on behavior change of this kind, making films and making AI chatbots. I learned to do it because I was frustrated 10 years ago. And when I heard the MIT report, I spent a year along with a Bollywood film director and a global expert understanding for a year what not to do and what to do.
No, thank you so much for that. And I love the move away from beneficiaries and communities, and to Aisata's point, local systems or governance, and actually really looking at the ecosystem and seeing the use of media, but then also it has to be 360. Everyone is a part of that intervention. There's a question that's come up here that I think is perfect for one for Stuart, one for Aisata. As you can see the time, there's a countdown. But can we go to the question around the younger population? Because I think, Aisata, you were getting to a really deep point, and I'm sorry we had to shorten it a little bit, around the continent itself, Africa, and some sort of the lack of how we're not as equipped, our leaders are not as equipped to really deepen the nuances of our population, especially such a young population to which you spoke to. So there's a quick question here, and I will literally give you a minute. Younger generations may less respond to traditional pronatalist messages and instead value autonomy. How should narratives and policies adapt, and what might future populations look like? It's an excellent question, whoever sent that in.
Thank you. Yes, thank you. Great question. So I'm going to just give 2 examples to illustrate, because it would be a long conversation. The first one is, I very often say that figure, 70% is below 35. When I'm talking, so I work with government, national assemblies, civil society, citizens, whatever. So different range, different age roles. I work with media. And this is part of the response to the question before. How do we make this a social issue? How is it discussed with killing the false belief and really telling the truth? So with people of my age and above, very often when I say this figure, 70% is below, so nobody is moved, it's like, yeah, okay. And I'm like, no, it's you take 10%, 7 are below 35. And in West African Francophone, you're a man when you are 40, okay? It's maybe a joke, but not that joke. It's really important. You're not a man because you're not a grown-up because you are voting, because you are making decisions or have kids. It's really still quite grounded. Vivian, no? Okay, Vivian is from Benin. We know what you're talking about. And so I said, 7% in 10 are below 35. 2 are above 60, only 1 is bearing all the stuff. So the question that is moving people is, okay, the question is not about the planet for the future generation, is who is going to pay you pensions? Then everybody starts thinking, oh yes, we have an issue. Less than 10% is a formal system. Nobody's going to pay. When I say the same figures to young people, I work with young citizens, and they are below 30, they really think about that. And I really remember talking about that and linking and connecting young citizens that are activists and researchers in generational economics. They were fascinating. 2 weeks later, one of them told me, I've dreamt about this figure. You told that I'm the only. I said, yes, you're the only one. You don't want to take the money from donors, but you need it. You're going to be exhausted because you're the only one to build this. So there is really something to bring to people, to these young people. They want to know, they want to understand how policies are designed. Right. And last example, very quickly, one of them told me, if I need to renew my ID, I'm 22, and actually, I even don't know how to do, because traditionally my mother, my uncle goes, I know someone, we're going to do that. If we want to vote and decide, we need to reappropriate what it means to have our ID, our paper, how it is working. So in Africa, there is no more intergenerational bridges. The population is too young and they need to learn. We have depoliticized development. Now you're a technician, now you're a citizen. The word citizen has disappeared. So I think rebuilding this link between planning, budgeting, and being a citizen, for me, is the very first thing. Well, actually, this is what I really want to do for the rest of my life, because just cannot be back and say, I'm from Mali. We were discussing this, saying, okay, we create the issue, you're going to find a solution.
Thank you, Aissata. And last response, Stuart, please.
I mean, just very quick on these two issues. This is very easy, because on this question of bringing younger people in. At the minute, policies for younger people, for younger women, are designed by old men, and it's not working. And it's not pretty obvious, right? Because a 65-year-old privileged man doesn't know really very much about a young person and what their wants and needs are. So this is very easy. We listen to people, younger people, and we bring them into the policy discussion, not in this kind of trite way of, here's our youth panelist who's going to tell us that. No. It's got to be mainstream. Younger people have got to be brought properly into the conversation, built around what younger people want, what they need, and not the perception of what they want and what they need, which is probably based upon how youth thought 40 years ago, which is going to be completely wrong. And then the last thing is just on this patriarchal issue and this social norm issue, just really super quickly, is, 20th century, typical utilitarian population policy is patriarchal, because people are a means to an end, and a means to, I'm going to sound like a Marxist now, but a means to economic growth and economic development. And economic growth and development is a patriarchal structure and is in the hands of men. So in that sense, traditional population policy is patriarchal. And the only way that, the paradigm shift that we need is to go away from shifting social norms. If you say, well, we're on your side, let's increase maternity leave to 12 months and paternity leave to 1 month. That still makes the assumption that maternity leave is 10 months longer than paternity leave, so therefore the social norm is that women are the primary caregivers for children. You're entrenching a social norm. And in Spain, they had a policy, they made paternity leave longer. And that men who took longer paternity leave wanted to have fewer children, because you didn't address the social norm, right? So there has to be underpinning things. And a very good example of this is in Moldova, right? Moldova is maybe the first time Moldova has been discussed in this conference, actually, but Moldova, they really do this very, very well. You have gender-responsive family policy. Men and boys are brought into the conversation right from the start. It is intergenerational, different ages. You have data. You have the generations and gender survey. So it's evidence-based. We listen to what people want, people need. So there are good examples out there, but we just need to kind of focus on what works, because we need to address all of these issues together.
Thank you so much, Stuart. And I think to you and Aissata, it's easy, but it's not. And how do we foster a true intergenerational convergence and support? So we apologize. We are really run out of time. If you may bear with us for an extra 5 minutes, because we may run over 5 minutes. Please do stay. We'll be very grateful. We're going to wrap up, because this has been extremely fascinating. In 30 seconds, everyone, what is the one takeaway message you want us to walk away with? Literally 30 seconds, and I'll just go to the next. I will start with you, Dutchin. In 30 seconds or less, what is the one takeaway message you'd like us to go away with? I love it. And the mic as well. Thank you. Poonam?
So if capital can fly, goods can fly across borders, why can't people? Immigration is to be looked at, or migration has to be looked at as a solution. And finally, I want to say, apart from mortality, decreasing mortality for those who fear numbers are decreasing, I want to say to them, in addition to suicides and other ways of preventing mortality, I want to add two things. Stop the wars. We lose a lot of people.
Right.
And again, a second that I want to mention is infertility.
Right.
Let's respond to the infertility, not just fertility needs of women and men. Infertility is increasing, and it is going to increase globally because of climate change.
Right.
So there are let's look at creative ways to do it and keep women at the center.
Thank you so much, Poonam. Stewart?
I think just to draw on what we've all tried to do today is what we've got to do is move away from the way which population is normally presented, where it's presented as a crisis, it's in crisis mode, and it's like, well, here's a graph to the end of the century, here's a nuclear war, here's the worst thing in the world. It's not, right? This is the old way of looking at people. People are not a means to an end, right? People's well-being, people's health, people's joy, people's happiness is a means of itself. And the funny thing is if we increase all of those things, the economy will do well as well. All of these big concerns at the macro level will be taken care of. But we've got to listen to people, see what they want, trust people, and work with them to make their lives better.
Thank you so much. Aisata?
Thank you. I think it's really about trusting and equipping the young generation. Obviously, here you're talking about population aging, and on my continent, the population is very young. There is a growing number of old people. And the young generation is not only bearing the issue of preparing their human capital, but also taking care. So trusting them, but also equipping them, not pretending we had the solution, because here is where we are now and where we led them. And also having this honesty to discuss about the migration aspect, because whatever we think politically, it is happening.
It is happening.
So if it's not managed, it's going to be another source of conflict, and we owe the next generation to prepare that.
We certainly do owe the next generation. Thank you. Please give our panelists a really big, big round of applause. I really... And give yourselves a big round of applause for those who stayed. Thank you so much. And I would just really love to take this opportunity before I wrap up, an extra 2 minutes. Please do share your feedback by scanning the QR code on the screen. Don't forget to screenshot your completed evaluation to redeem a daily stamp of evaluation point collection mini game. I think there are some prizes associated with it. Please, before you leave the room, do take all your belongings, scan the code, give your feedback. And, what we have heard today is not a signal narrative, but it is a shared signal. Values are already shaping population policy. They have always been shaping it. The question is whether we're willing to name them, whether we're willing to debate them, and design them with intention rather than inheritance. Population policy, as we've heard today, is not just about numbers. It is about our lives, your lives, my life. It is about the lives who we count and how we count those lives. And I hope as we walk out today, we are on a mission to mainstream happiness, to connect with one another, and to really not shy away from bringing values such as care and love and being present in seeing people in all that we do in the various roles that we occupy. Thank you once again, and have a wonderful rest of your day.